Hello, welcome to Ikate's Crossing. Okay, I want to continue reading Chapter 10, Secret of Shambhala. This is the third book in the Celestine Prophecy. I'm using Siddartha Tarot in the Buddhism Oracle. So before we continue this this Chapter 10, let's have a look. It is called Acknowledging the Light. So acknowledging the light, we're up to part 2, and let's use the Siddartha Tarot and the Buddhism Oracle. So what message? Oh, here we go. The first one we've got here is the Six of Swords. So Six of Swords to me is that sense of a shift, a sense of a moving forward from leaving behind the old. So you're moving into the unknown. There's a shift in maybe perceptions or ideas, maybe in the way that you communicate. It definitely feels like there's some sort of shift or something going on. It's all about moving forward with successes, acknowledging those moments that feel like they're a triumph, they're a success, acknowledging that and allowing yourself to keep moving forward in that direction, or it's telling you that you're moving in the right direction. It's all about life's ups and downs. It's all about moving forward into new cycles. It feels like there's always that shift that's changing the cycle that you're moving through. So that's kind of interesting there. Here we've got the Page of Pentacles telling us that we're always learning, always discovering, with that sense of moving forward with a fresh start, a fresh set of eyes in some way. It feels like you're always learning, always discovering that something new going on. It's all about trusting your intuition. Again, the High Priestess can be about learning and studying, that sense of discovering what's being hidden and moving forward here. Judgment, again, you've got that awakening, that resurrection of something new. So there feels like there's a lot of movement going on here. There is a lot of movement in these cards. You're moving forward, you're shifting your perception. Again, you've got triumph, you've got that success, that victory as you continue to sort of move forward on that path. Again, you've got that cycle. As you move forward on the journey, you might find moments where this cycle sort of stops, but if you keep moving forward with the learning and the discovering, remembering the hidden knowledge that brings forth in the situation, allowing you again to have that resurrection of something, which is kind of interesting. There's a lot of movement going on in many areas of your life, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so the card that sort of popped out first was this one here, transformation. Again, you've got that sense of changes, that shift, that perspective. Feels like there is that self-centered mentality which cannot lead to happiness. Attain true happiness by abandoning the self-grasping mentality and assuming the mentality of enlightened aspiration. So it just tells me that it's the way that you allow yourself to expand and move forward. Not get tucked in here, not get tucked deep within yourself, but allow yourself to sort of expand your horizons, allow yourself to expand your perspectives, allowing that transformation to move forward on this journey here. Kind of interesting. I don't want to dive too deep as we continue this chapter. Okay, chapter 10, we're up to Acknowledging the Light, part 2. We were reaching the summit of the mountain. Behind us, the sun was beginning to break through the thick overcast, and it felt as if the temperature was warning. I was told, Will said, stop just short of the mountain's top, but the temple's on the other side of this ridge. He stopped and looked at me. This may be the hardest part. His words sounded ominous to me. Why, I asked, what do you mean? We have to put all the extensions together and keep our energy as strong as possible. The legends say that only if we are able to keep our energy high enough will we be able to see the temples. At exactly this moment we heard helicopters somewhere in the distance. And don't forget what you just learnt, Will said. If you start to think about the evil in the Chinese military, if you feel anger or disgust, you must shift your attention immediately to the soul in each soldier that can emerge. Visualize your energy flowing out from you and entering their fields, lifting them into a connection with the light inside so that they can discover their higher intuitions. To do otherwise is to send a prayer out that gives them more energy to be evil. I nodded and looked down. I was determined to maintain this positive field. Now go beyond that to acknowledge the Dakini and expect the luminosities. I looked out at the summit just ahead, and Will nodded and led the way forward. When we reached the crest, we could see nothing on the other side except a series of snow-covered peaks and valleys. We surveyed the scene carefully. Over there, Will yelled, pointing to our left. I strained to see. Something at the edge of the crest seemed to be shimmering slightly. When I tried to focus on it directly, all I saw was that the area seemed luminous. But when I looked at it through the corner of my eye, I could tell that the space itself was shimmering. Let's go, Will said. He pulled my arm as we made our way across the deep snow and up to the spot we'd seen. As we walked closer, the area seemed to grow brighter still. Beyond it was a series of huge rocky spars that looked from a distance to be lined up side by side. Upon closer inspection, however, we found that one was set back from the others, leaving a narrow passage that bent around further to the left and down the slope of the mountain. When we reached the passage, we discovered that these were actually stone steps, hewn into the rocks that led that way downward. The steps also appeared luminous and were clear of snow. The Dakini are showing us where to go, Will said, still pulling me along. We ducked through the opening and followed the descending pathway. On both sides, the sheer rock face rose upward 20 or 30 feet and blocked out most of the light. For more than an hour, we walked down the steps, steadily descending, until at last the cliffs widened above our heads. Several yards further, the ground levelled off and the steps ended. We found ourselves looking out on a flat precipice that wrapped around the rock face to the left. Over there, Will said, pointing. 200 yards ahead of us appeared to be an old monastery, totally in ruin, as if it were thousands of years old. As we walked towards it, the temperature warmed even more, and a misty ground fog rose from the rocks. In front of the monastery, the precipice widened into a wide shelf that cut into the side of the mountain. When we reached the ruins, we carefully made our way through the collapsed walls and large stones until we emerged on the other side. There we were stopped in our tracks. The rocky surface we were walking on had turned to the floor of a smooth, flat stones, light amber in colour, that were evenly placed onto the ground beneath our feet. I glanced at Will, who was looking straight ahead. In front of us was an attacked temple, standing 50 feet high and twice that wide. It was rusty brown with streaks of grey along the joints of the fitted stone walls. On the front were two mammoth doors, 15 or 20 feet high. Something moved in the misty fog near the temple. I looked at Will, and he nodded, motioning me to follow him. We walked to within 20 yards of the structure. What was that movement? I asked Will. He gestured with his head towards the area in front of us. Less than 10 feet away was a form of some kind. I strained to focus, and finally was able to detect the barest outline of a human figure. It must be one of the adepts who inhabit the temples, Will said. The person is vibrating higher than us. That's why we can only see a hazy shape. As we watched, the shape moved towards the door of the temple and disappeared. Will led the way up to the door. It appeared to be made of some kind of stone. Yet, when Will pulled it by the carved stone knob, it glided open as though it weighed nothing. Inside was a large circular room, sloping downward in a series of terraced steps towards the centre stage-like area. As I surveyed the structure, I caught sight of another figure halfway to the stage. Only this person was clear to our perception. He turned so we could see his face. It was Tashi. Will was already moving towards him. Before we reached Tashi, a spatial window appeared in the space just above the centre of the room. The image slowly came into focus. captivating our attention and growing so bright we could no longer see Tashi. It was a view of the Earth seen from space. The scene shifted in quick succession to a view of a city somewhere in Europe, and then to a metropolitan area in the United States, and finally to one in Asia. In each case, we could see people walking on busy streets, as well as some in offices or other work environments. As the scene again shifted through different cities and different areas of the planet, we could see the individuals, as they worked and interacted, were slowly raising their energy levels. We began to see and hear individuals involved in moving from one type of occupation to another, following their intuitions and growing more inspired and creative as they did so, inventing new and faster technologies and more efficient services. At the same time, we also began to see scenes of people who were still in fear, resisting the changes and trying to gain control. Next, we focused on a research facility inside a conference room. A group of men and women was engaged in a heated exchange. As we watched and listened, the content of the conversation became clear. Most of the people were in favor of a new coalition between the larger communications and computer companies and an international group of intelligence services. The representatives of the intelligence services argued that the fight against terrorism necessitated having access to every telephone line, including internet communications and secret identification devices on all computers, so that authorities could go in and monitor anyone's files. But that wasn't all. They wanted more surveillance systems. Several of the people were even speculating that if the problem of computer viruses continued, the internet might have to be taken over completely, along with all linked computers and commerce everywhere. Access could be controlled, but a special ID number would be required in order to do any electronically based business. One hypothesized that new identification systems might have to be implemented for this use, such as iris or palm scans, or perhaps even something based on brainwave patterns themselves. Two other people, a man and a woman, started arguing vehemently against these measures. One mentioned the Book of Revelations and the Mark of the Beast. As we continued to watch and listen, I realized I could see through the window of the conferences room. A car was passing along a road outside the building. In the background, I could see cactus and miles of desert. I looked at Will. "This discussion is happening right now," he said, "in present time somewhere. It looks like the southwestern US. Directly behind this table where the group was gathered, I noticed something else. The space around them was becoming larger. No, it was becoming lighter. The Dakini," I said to Will. We continued to watch as the conversation began to change. The two people who were arguing against the extreme surveillance seemed to be gaining more attention from the group. The proponents seemed to be reconsidering. Without warning, our attention was pulled away from the image in front of us by a sharp vibration that shook the floor and walls of the temple. We ran for another door at the end of the building, fighting to see through the dust. We could hear stones crumbling and falling outside. When we were 30 feet from the door, it opened, and a figure we couldn't make out quickly moved through it. "That must have been Tashi," Will said as he rushed to the door and pulled it open. As we ran through the opening, another booming crash filled the air behind us. The old ruin we had first seen was collapsing in an implosion of rocks and dust. Behind it somewhere we could hear the roar of helicopters. "The Colonel seems to be following us again," I said, "but I'm holding only positive images in my mind. So how is he doing that?" Will looked at me questioningly, and I remembered Colonel Chang's remark about how he now had the technology so that I could never get away. He had my brain scan. I quickly told Will what had happened, then said maybe I should go in another direction. "Lead the soldiers out of the temples." "No," Will said. "You have to be here. You're going to be needed. We'll have to stay ahead of them until we find Tashi." We followed a stone pathway past several other temples, and I found my eyes lingering on a doorway to our left. Will turned, noticing. "Why were you looking at that door?" he asked. "I don't know," he replied. It caught my attention. He gave me an incredulous look. "Oh yeah, right," I said quickly. "Let's check it out." We ran inside, and I found another circular room, this one much larger, perhaps several hundred feet in diameter. Another spatial window was hovering over the center. As we entered, I saw Tashi to our right a few yards away and nudged Will. I see him, Will said, leading the way in near darkness to join the boy. Tashi turned around and saw us, then smiled in relief, before focusing again on the scene visible through the window. This time we were seeing a room filled with the things of youth. Pictures, balls of various games, piles of clothes. A bed was in disarray in the corner, and carry-out pizza box lit at one end of a table. At the other end of the table, a teenager of about 15 worked on something, some kind of weird apparatus. He was dressed in shorts without a shirt, and his face seemed angry and determined. As we continued to watch, the scene through the window shifted to another room, where another teenager dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt sat on a bed staring at a phone. He got up and paced across the room several times, and then sat down again. I got the impression that he was struggling with a decision. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. At that point, the window widened, so that we could see both scenes. The boy with no shirt answered the phone. The youth in the sweatshirt seemed to be pleading, and the other boy grew ever more angry. Finally, the shirtless boy slammed down the phone, sat down, and began working at the table again. The other teenager got up and put on a coat and hurried out the door. In a few minutes, the boy at the table heard a knock and got up and walked over to the door of his room and opened it. It was the youth he'd been talking to on the phone. He tried to shut the door, but the boy pushed his way in, continuing to talk to him in pleading gestures, pointing at the apparatus on the table. The other teenager pushed him back and pulled a gun from a drawer and pointed it at his visitor. The boy stepped back but continued to plead. The youth with the gun exploded with anger and pushed his victim hard against a wall, placing the barrel of the gun against his temple. At this moment, in the area behind them both, we began to detect a change. The area was getting lighter. I glanced at Tashi, who met my gaze for an instant, then focused again on the scene. We both knew we were again witnessing the Dakini at work. As we watched, the one boy continued to plead, and the other held him firmly against the wall. But gradually the boy with the gun began to relax. Finally he dropped the gun to his side and went over and sat on the edge of the bed. The other youth sat down in a chair facing him. Now we could hear details of their conversation, and it became clear that the boy who had the gun wanted to be accepted by others at his school but had not been. Many of his peers were excelling at extracurricular activities, expanding their talents, and he didn't have the confidence to keep up. They had been kidding him, calling him a loser, and he felt as though he was a nobody, that he was fading away. The situation filled him with anger and a false sense of strength, which had led him to decide to fight back. The device he'd been working on was a homemade bomb. Just as before, we felt a jolt under our feet, and the whole building shook. We all ran for the door and had just made it out when half the temple collapsed behind us. Tashi motioned for us to follow him, and we ran several hundred yards and stopped beside a wall. Could you see the people in the temple? He asked. The ones who were sending prayer energy to the boys? We both confessed we could not. There were hundreds in there, he said, working on the problem of youth anger. What were they doing exactly? I asked. Tashi stepped towards me. They were extending their prayer energy, visualizing the boys in that scene, lifted into higher vibration, so they could move past their fear and anger and find their higher intuitions to resolve the situation. Their energy helped the one youth find the best, most persuasive ideas. In the case of the other youth, the extra prayer energy lifted him into an identity above and beyond the social self his peers rejected. He no longer felt that in order to be someone, he needed their approval. It eased his anger. And that's what they were doing in the other temple as well, I asked, helping to counter those who want to control everything. Will looked at me. The people in the temple were sending out a prayer field aimed at helping to raise the energy level of everyone involved, which had the effect of easing the fear of those who were pressing for ever more surveillance, and helping those who were resisting to find the courage to speak, even within those kinds of organizations. Tashi was nodding. We are supposed to be seeing this. These are some of the key situations that must be won if spiritual evolution is to continue, if we are to get past this critical point in history. What about the Dakini? I asked. What are they doing? They were helping lift the energy level as well, Tashi replied. Yeah, I pressed, but we still don't know what makes them go there and take action. Those in the temples were doing something else we don't know yet. At that moment, another loud crash noise. At that moment, another loud noise filled the air as the other half of the temple behind us crashed to the ground. Tashi jumped involuntarily, then hurried down the pathway. Come on, he said. We have to find my grandmother. Okay, that's it for today. Then we're on to chapter 11, The Secret of Shambhala. Ooh. Okay, so that's it from me. Don't forget to check the links down below. Check the links on my channel. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell so we know when the next video will be uploaded. Take care and blessed be. I want to say a big thank you to my Ko-Fi members as well. Thank you.